On the marketplace, new Bank of Ghana Governor Dr. Johnson Esiama vows to protect the independence of the central bank as he formally assumes office.
Thinks that we should do this. It's a way of enforcing our independence as a central bank. The public must see us, as working together.
Also coming out, food inflation surges to 28.3% in the month of January, the highest in 10 months.
Consumer Price Index for the month of January 2025 stood at 252.6 relative to 204.5. Given these two indices, year-on-year rate of inflation for the month of January 2025 stood at 23.5%. Year-on-year annual rate of inflation for the month of January 2025 stood at 23.5%.
And prices of petroleum products to go up by more than 2% per litre. My name is Daryl Kwao. Thanks for being with us. Details coming up. And thanks for joining us this afternoon. First up, new Bank of Ghana Governor Dr. Johnson Esiama has vowed to protect the independence of the central bank. He said this at a meeting today where he formally assumed the role of governor of the central bank.
I was explaining to my colleagues a while ago, His Excellency the President thinks that we should do this. It's a way of enforcing our independence as a central bank. The public must see us, as working together. It's just another transition, which is normal. The good thing is some of the people here are people we know already. And so the transition, you can be sure, will be smooth. Today is day one. We are just touching base, getting updated on issues. As the days unfold, we'll get to other things. Early this morning, we have held a number of discussions already between ourselves. Some briefing has gone on. And so far, so good. You can be sure that everything will be fine. We are focused on our mandate, and that is what matters. And so you can look forward, to us executing our mandate as we've been doing.
Well, more from Dr. Esiama now on his promises of a smooth transition.
In the boardroom at the old building, you had the photographs of the previous governors. And looking at those photographs, it brings, old memories back. And for me, that's something I want to look at, as quickly as possible. It reminds you how time flies. And I can remember my early days in the bank, and I never knew there would come a day when I would join those honorable men, And so, yes, lots of memories, lots of, nostalgic feelings. But hopefully we have the team. It's a good team. We should be able to carry on from where Dr. Addison is leaving off. you know. But we'll brief you, like I said, we'll brief you, you know, on the policy focus later on.
Well, turning to other stories, inflation for the month of January 2025 declined marginally from 23.8% in December 2024 to 23.5% according to data from the Ghana Statistical Service. However, food inflation for January went up to 28.3% from 27.8% in December 2024. Now, that is the highest in 10 months. Now, non-food inflation went down by 19.2% in January compared to 20.3% in November 2024. Here's government statistician Professor Samuel Kobnenim speaking to the press briefing in this report.
According to the Ghana Statistical Service, inflation for locally produced items declined to 25.7% in January 2025 compared to 26.4% in December 2024. Also, inflation for imported items went up to 18.4% compared to 17.9% in December 2024.
Consumer Price Index for the month of January 2025 stood at 252.6 relative to 204.5. Given these two indices, year-on-year rate of inflation for the month of January 2025 stood at 23.5%. Year-on-year annual rate of inflation for the month of January 2025 stood at 23.5. This indicates a slowdown of 0.3 percentage point, leading to a disinflation for the month of January 2025, with December rate at 23.8%, slowing down by 0.3 percentage point in January 2025, leading to a disinflation with a rate of inflation figure of 23.5% for the month of January 2025. This means that over the one-year period between January 2024 and January 2025, general price levels of goods and services went up by 23.5%. In the month of January 2025, general price levels of goods and services went up by 23.5%. In the month of January 2025, Consumer Price Index, which stood at 252.6 relative to 248.3, indicates that between December 2024 and January 2025, general price levels of goods and services went up by 1.7%, indicating a 0.1 percentage point slowdown for a month-on-month inflation.
Alcoholic beverages, tobacco, and narcotics recorded an inflation of 27.2%. Food and non-alcoholic beverages also recorded 28.3%, while housing, water, electricity, gas, and other foods had 24.6%. These divisions recorded a higher inflation compared to the national inflation.
We recorded a 9.1 percentage point difference between inflation for food items and inflation for non-food items, with inflation for food items recording 28.3% for the month of January 2025 relative to 19.2% for non-food for the month of January 2025. We have seen an increase in food inflation, increasing from 27.8 to 28.3 between December 2024 and January 2025, indicating a 0.5 percentage point increase for food inflation between December 2024 and January 2025. We've seen a slowdown in non-food inflation. Non-food inflation was 20.3 for the month of December 2024 and slowed down to 19.2% for the month of January 2025. On a month-on-month basis, we recorded a 0.6 percentage point difference between food inflation and non-food inflation, with food inflation recording 2.0% for the month of January 2025 and 1.4% for non-food for the same period, January 2025.
The Upper West region recorded the highest regional inflation of 49.9%. Meanwhile, the Volta region had the lowest regional inflation rate of 18%. James Eshen's report for Joy Business.
Now, prices of petroleum products are expected to go up by some 2% per litre beginning today. LPG will also witness a significant increase per kilogram. This is based on internal data that guides the pricing of oil marketing companies in the country. Here's George Jaffe with more.
Petrol should go up by some 1.9%. This should mean that a litre is likely to be sold today at around 15 Ghana cedis, 72 pesos. Diesel, on the other hand, should go up by 2.1%, resulting in a litre being sold at 16 Ghana cedis, 60 pesos per litre. However, LPG may witness the biggest jump again in prices, going up by 4.6%. This should mean that a kilogram could be sold this morning at around 18 Ghana cedis, 20 pesos. We are not sure for now whether all the oil marketing companies will be guided by these prices, as competition may not see some of them review their prices by this expected margin. Joy Business understands that the increase has been influenced by rising prices of crude oil on the international market, as well as that of finished petroleum products. The city's performance has also been a major factor, as it has depreciated by more than 2% against the US dollar, ending January this year.
All right, now for the fifth week running, government recorded an oversubscription of treasury bills. The auction results show that the government recorded 43.59% of the sale of the short-term instruments. Meanwhile, interest rates declined for the first time in several weeks. Here's more in this Business Desk report.
The government received an incredible 9.372 billion cedis as demand for T-bills surged. This was against a target of 6.527 billion cedis. 5.590 billion cedis of the bid tendered came from the 91-day bill. This represented 59.64% of the total bills tendered. 5.224 billion cedis of the bid were accepted. For the 182-day bill, 1.522 billion cedis of the bids were tendered. Only 531.4 million cedis were accepted. Once again, the one-year bill received more bids than the 182-day bill. 2.259 billion cedis were the bids tendered. 2.240 of the bids were accepted. Meanwhile, interest rates went down for the first time in several weeks. It decreased by 10 basis points to 28.41% with respect to the 91-day bill. For the 182-day bill, the yield was 28.89% compared with 29.77% the previous week. The interest on the 364-day bill also declined by 3 basis points to 30.37%.
We are heading to a short break. When we come back, my colleague Winston Taki picks it up with our Joy Business Advisory series on managing the risk of fraud.
On today's Joy Business Advisory series, we'll delve into fraud. We'll ascertain the types of fraud and the risk levels of Ghanaian businesses. My guest today, Ni Asafoche Abe, is the Associate Director for Financial Advisory at Deloitte, who will help us understand what businesses can do to mitigate such attacks. Hello, Ni, it's good to have you here today.
Pleased to be here, Winston.
Wonderful, wonderful. Let's go straight to the conversation. Now, when they talk about fraud, in a very simplistic way, help us understand, what is fraud?
So fraud is simply deceiving others for gain, whether it's financial gain or some other personal gain, but it's basically deception to gain something from that deception.
And in what types do they come up like?
Okay, so fraud comes in many flavors, but in the business context, what we call occupational fraud, there are three main categories. So the first is corruption. We are familiar with that. It's abusing the trust you have, either from your employer or from some other organization, the power you have to benefit yourself. So things like conflict of interest or bribing others. And this is actually quite difficult to detect, because in our Ghanaian context, it's often at a funeral that you get to know who is related to who. So you find someone who is tweaking procurement procedures so the company will be buying from their relatives, and no one will know those kind of things. So that's one aspect of fraud, the corruption side. Then there is also asset misappropriation, which is just a fancy term for stealing. So either stealing cash, stealing other things that you could sell for cash down the line. And this is also quite common in our Ghanaian context, because we tend to have weak controls at our businesses. And so people exploit these weaknesses to the detriment of the company. And then finally, there is what we call financial statement fraud. It's more to do with how you report your performance to the rest of the world. It's not too common here because often the motivating factor is someone's salary is tied to the numbers. And so they'll fudge it so they can benefit from it. So basically, these are the types of occupational fraud that we often have to deal with.
That's very interesting. Now, I want to understand what motivates people to defraud other engaging businesses or individuals.
Okay. So the typical fraudster doesn't look any different from you and I.
Really?
Yes. Anyone can defraud. You just need the right environment. And what that entails is, first of all, there should be a vulnerability that they are going to exploit. Maybe they realize that, this account, no one checks it. And so there's that weakness there. But sometimes these weaknesses exist, but no one actually does anything about it. And so oftentimes what will trigger someone to defraud is where there's a right pressure, a right incentive. So maybe they're under pressure, medical bills are overwhelming. They don't have anywhere to turn, and so they exploit that weakness. And the third facet of it is how they justify their actions. So maybe they say, everyone does it. No one will catch me. So if these three things are present, you'll find fraud happening.
Now, help me understand, what are some of the situational incidents that encourages fraud in any business establishment, both locally and internationally?
Okay, so let me dig into the point I made earlier.
Yes.
So when we look at the vulnerability side I spoke about, so an example I gave is where an account is not often reconciled, or the person realizes that these things that are in the warehouse, the security man is often not there. So that weakness is there. And so if the person is under pressure, be it societal pressure, they are seeing people on social media displaying, they don't know where they got those things from, but they want to get those same things. And so they go for that. And if they are in a kind of environment where it's as if fraud is tolerated, or people don't really care, the people at the top, they themselves, they are doing it. They find a way to justify it in their minds. And so these three conditions, if you are there, you will find that fraud often occurs.
These three conditions, which one is more peculiar in our situation in doing business in Ghana as of now?
All three, actually. All three. It's called the fraud triangle. It's a classic approach to looking at fraud. There are other ways of looking at it, though, but these three elements are almost always there, wherever the context is, whichever country you are looking at when it comes to fraud. And so what exactly shifts may be different. For instance, in our environment, we tend to have very weak controls, especially for our small businesses. So you'll find that the same person who is taking in the cash from customers is the same person who will take it to the bank and all that. No one is in there to separate those duties. And so you are incentivizing this person to defraud you. So in our environment, we often find that weak controls are the predominant factor when it comes to fraud.
So with the presence of a weak control structure within an organizational system, what would you say businesses should do to identify or deal with fraud cases?
Okay. So first of all, when it comes to fraud, I like to compare it to a chronic illness. You cannot eliminate it. It's always there. Fraud has always been there from Bible times to now. We've always had fraud. But like the way a chronic illness is, let's take diabetes as an example. If you know you have a family history of diabetes, you take measures to prevent it from happening. So diet, exercise, all those things the doctor said we should do, we don't do. And you would also go the extra step of putting in place measures to detect it if it happens. So you do regular checkups. You go and do your blood sugar test and all those. So if it happens, you will know early. Then you will know how to respond. If you know early, the response is usually quite mild. Maybe change in diet, change in your behavior. But if you don't get to know early, oftentimes the response is a drastic one. So probably surgery will be needed, or maybe amputation because a limb has had a problem. In the same way, when it comes to fraud, you don't eliminate it, you manage it. So you have measures to prevent it from happening. Mm-hmm. So one of them is what I just mentioned, tone at the top. The leaders in the company showing that they don't tolerate it by their actions, by their words, by their behavior. That's a very good way of preventing fraud, because you know if it happens, there will be bloodhounds who will chase after it and get after it. And there's also training people to do their jobs well. So for instance, a person is supposed to handle cash. All those controls you've put in place, is he doing it right? But training also has another aspect of getting your employees to know signs of fraud. Mm-hmm. Because it brings us to the next one, detecting it. So we talk about prevention. The most common way that fraud comes to the attention of authorities is people blowing the whistle. So, and it's mostly employees who anonymously come and tell you that this person is doing ABC. Because the typical fraudster is someone who has been in the company for a while and has a position of trust. So they know the controls, they know how to go around it. So your typical controls will not catch this kind of person, usually a more senior person.
So what happens when that particular case is identified?
Very good. So that's the third leg of managing fraud, the response. So the response should be such that people should be afraid to do it. So you do a thorough investigation when these things come to your attention. The worst thing you can do is to ignore it, because then you send a message, this is tolerated. So you do a thorough investigation. There are rules about doing investigations so that it will stand up in court if you want to go to that extent, or disciplinaries, so that it won't come back to bite you as a company. So these are the main pillars of an effective fraud risk management program at a business.
We are in an era of using technology, your phones, your businesses. There's encouragement.